Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. I am currently reading Little Blue Book number 1205, and it is titled Thomas Paine's Revolt Against the Bible. Now, I usually show the book, but this one is falling apart. These books some of them are 100 years old or 90 plus years old, and they're made on cheap paper, so this one happens to be falling apart. This will be the last chapter, and the last part, chapter 5. And here we go. Chapter 5 is Last Years. I have had to write some painful passages in this little sketch of Paine's career, but this last chapter is the most painful of all. He reached America to find himself ostracized. Leslie Stephen says, and Conway incidentally uses the same word, Jefferson remained staunch, but few others amongst the survivors of the great struggle in which he had played no insignificant part, held out a hand to him. John Adams became a violent and contemptuous opponent. A crowd one day hooted Paine in New York, and he was now old, and in his 66th year, worn with labor for humanity, poorer than the meanest politician who grafted on the new national life. He had to skip from lodging house to lodging house, and a new libelous life, worse than the preceding, appeared in New York. Paine's attack on Christianity was the pretext, where it was not the cause. It is time that modern America, no longer controlled by the clergy, made amends to his memory. In large part, of course, the breach in American politics was responsible. When Monsieur Conway, a good American, can write of the coup d'etat in America, which made President Adams virtual emperor, we may assume that Paine was not very reticent. But the political hostility to him made a pretext of his infidelity. It sits rather badly in the mouth of John Adams, who, as I prove from his own letters in Little Blue Book number 1203, called the doctrine of incarnation an awful blasphemy, and spoke of God as an essence that we know nothing of. But the worst offender was John Quincy Adams, the most religious of the first 6 presidents, and the only one who professed to be a Christian. If that is a sneer at religion, kindly blame the facts, not me. It is a bald statement of the historical truth. The clergy urged even Democrats against Paine, where they could influence them, as in Tammany, though in other places Paine was glorified as the author of Rights of Man. After a short and greatly treasured visit to Jefferson, who often afterwards asked his opinion on affairs of state, Paine settled in his little house at Bordertown. Later, a lady arrived from Paris with her 3 children, and Paine went to his larger house at New Rochelle, where this lady, Mimi de Bonneville, kept house for him. He had lodged in their house at Paris, but the husband was now in political trouble, unable either to accompany his wife or send her money. She was a Catholic, and was 31 years younger than Paine, now nearly 70, but, of course, we will come to that later. Paine grew more and more depressed. His severe illness at Paris, his advancing age, his poor circumstances, his isolation from the world to which of right he belonged, his consciousness of the price of honesty while he saw rogues and hypocrites flourish, could hardly tend to cheerfulness. One day a man poked a musket through his window and tried to murder him. An election came on, and when he would vote, officials told him that he was not an American, and he could get no redress. Nice payment for common sense in the crisis. He sold his farm and went into lodgings. He had an attack of apoplexy, 1806. He had, at times, to take cheap and uncomfortable quarters, and out of one of these experiences grew the second libelous life of Paine. Life of Thomas Paine by James Cheatham, 1809. Cheatham was the editor of a paper which was supported by the Jeffersonians, and he had, Paine said, frequented the deistic meetings run in New York by Elihu Palmer and Paine. He ratted and cheated, and Paine exposed him. If you insist, he will put it more politely that Mr. Cheetham saw the error of his ways, and had not time to say so properly before Paine's caustic pen got busy on him. Results, libellous life of Paine. Libellous is here not a partisan word for the most serious charge. A liaison of the old man with the young French Catholic lady was condemned in court by a heavily biased Christian judge as libel. Mimi de Bonneville sued Cheetham. He produced his witness, one of Paine's landlords, and the man broke down and admitted that it was a conspiracy. Cheetham was fined $150. The judge, as if to explain the unprecedented lightness of the punishment for so gross a cause of malicious libel, remarked that Cheetham's book had served the cause of religion, and has often been similarly served. Cheetham's witness, Carver, afterwards confessed that he was simply paid by Cheetham to bring his charges of drink, dirt, and immorality against Paine. Conway gives all the evidence and easily acquits Paine of anything more than possibly a carelessness about a dress, etc., which his depressing situation fully explains. As to morals, Sir Leslie Stephen says, Dictionary of National Biography, Paine's innumerable enemies never accuse him of sexual immorality, and in that request his life seems to have been blameless. I should be inclined to say, considering his lifelong separation from his wife and the conditions of the time, that it was historically and superficially virtuous. At all events, let Puritans know what they are talking about. Paine was an eccentric. My esteemed friend Leslie Stevens, the finest literary man of his time in England, figures very unfavorably in Conway's and others' books on Paine. He was at one time innocently deceived by the libellous lives, and fine scholar, as he generously was. He certainly, in this case, exposed himself to censure for not more closely inquiring into his authorities. Though the reference to Paine was an incident in his large work, he more than once, in conversation with me, deeply regretted he had been so deceived, for he was one of the finest men of his time. But his critics, admirers of Paine, as Stephen himself became, are likewise open to censure. They complain that Stephen did not adequately correct the injustice in the next edition of his work, and they say not a word about Stephen's important article on Paine in the Dictionary of National Biography. It clears Paine of every charge made against him, and is a most useful summary of Conway's own work. Stephen was the greatest biographical critic of his time, and he was unsympathetic to Paine's politics, being a convinced royalist. Yet he states in the most authoritative of all biographical dictionaries that the charge against Paine's morals was groundless, that the charge against his cleanliness refers only to one period of his life in Paris when illness would explain it, and that the charge of drink can quote in its support only the evidence of a London publisher, who once saw Paine drunk, and Paine's own admission that during the terror in Paris he occasionally drank brandy to excess. Paine is fully vindicated in the standard British work of reference. Cheetham's charge of drinking in America is, says Stephen, discredited. The witness Carver admitted that he lied, and another landlord of Paine's emphatically denied the charge. Paine ceased to drink brandy, which had given the redness of alcoholic indigestion to his nose when he left France. In America he drank rum, and in moderation. But what a petty, miserable, contemptible business it is, this inquiry into how much a week the aged and ailing Paine drank, and whether he had ever kissed his housekeeper, and whether he was always neat in his person. One feels inclined to collect a few of the caustic phrases of Voltaire and the full-bodied epithets of Martin Luther, and pour a broadside of them into the black-clad regiment. They have the minds of fishwives in a small village, yet they instruct thousands in the problems of the universe. To use the apologetic tone about Paine seems like apologizing for the pyramids, that they take up so much space. I would rather rub their noses in their hogwash and laugh at their simpering indictments. Yes, Paine got drunk once or twice in the sultry, brooding, bloody atmosphere of Paris in 1793. What of it? you rabbit-brained babblers of bunk. He also wrote Common Sense and The Crisis and Rights of Man, and he stands out in the whole history of letters as the author who made the greatest sacrifice for his ideals ever known in that history. And he lit up 100 years ago 3 nations with ideals which you have not yet properly assimilated. And he smote kings when you kissed their simperers. And he fought for the people and for all who were wronged, for women and for the slave and the child, when not a single person in the whole Christian world had the moral sentiments to see that they were wronged or the moral courage to say so. Paine's morals indeed. You ought to be put polishing doorknobs or washing near-beer glasses instead of teaching universal history, philosophy, scienceology, and sermons. After an intellectual training that would not enable a girl of 17 to matriculate, the last popular libel in the wrongful death bed recantation of Paine, rather the second dying recantation, since one appeared prematurely, as I said, 16 years before Paine's death. One of the most popular fairy tales of the pulpit used to be the deathbed recantation of the infidel. Voltaire, Paine, Ingersoll, Bradlaugh, Darwin, Huxley, Haeckel, all of them have recanted at death, or just before death. Understand quite clearly, somebody lied in the starting of each of these stories, and it is very near to lying for any man to repeat them. Now that the biography of each of these distinguished rationalists has been written, and the facts are easily ascertained. A case has occurred in the last few years. An English lady of what is called a high position in society, which generally means one who never did an honest day's work, has been insisting that Darwin in his last years avowed a really Christian belief to her. Darwin's own letters show what he believed, and his sons have flatly contradicted the story, yet it circulates through the consecrated houses of the globe. Conway gives the simple facts about Paine's death as told by the only witnesses. Some time before his death, 2 clergymen invaded his room with the usual insistence of the need of their valuable services. They might have got promotion, or would certainly have been visited to give a $100 sermon, How I Saved Thomas Paine. 100 times over, if Paine had been weak enough to let them pray. Let me alone, he said, and then, remembering to the last his standard of brotherliness, good morning. His last night was quiet. There is not the slightest foundation of legends about convulsions of fear or anxiety. When he had learned that his illness would probably be fatal, he had summoned 5 staunch friends and had repeated his deistic faith to them. For 50 years he had never wavered in it, and no man had been more loyal to his ideals. He believed firmly in a personal God, and he hoped as firmly that God would give him immortality. His last word was a reply to Mime de Bonneville. She had asked if he was satisfied with her. Oh, yes, he said, and he fell asleep on June 8th, 1809. There was no more pomp at his funeral than if he had been merely the local milkman, less than if he had done nothing more than carry a musket in the War of Independence. He was an infidel. He was worse. He said so. Franklin, Washington, Adams, Gouverneur Morris, and heaven knows how many more were infidels, but they had the discretion not to obtrude it. Paine had dared to expose the fraudulent bases of the enormous power of the churches, and even those who secretly agreed with him dared do no public honor to the man who had done more than any 10 writers in America to direct the people of a new civilization. The pen is mightier than the sword, they continued to say, sermoniously, and they let Paine have almost a pauper's funeral and a pauper's grave, and raised pyramids of carven stone over the bones of those who had wielded the sword. A Britisher, Cabot, who had tardily discovered the greatness of Paine, came to New Rochelle 10 years later, and had the bones exhumed. Nobody minded in America, and Cabot, though another apostle of common sense, thought that these bones might have some tithe of honor in Paine's natal country. But Europe was in the full blast of the White Terror of 1819. The superior people who knew that Paine's militancy was a mistake, who knew that superstition would die a natural death if you put truth into the minds of men, were all wrong. Paine was right. Truth is not fighting error. It is fighting immense corporations with vested interest. Nay, truth is an abstract word, a poetical fiction. Men fight men in real life, and Paine, in his lifetime, had almost single-handedly fought the legions of the clergy. They won, apparently. The Holy Alliance rolled Europe and reddened it. Paine's bones were kept as a domestic curiosity, and were seized as such by a creditor, and were thrown as valueless upon some unknown muck-heap. But Paine's words went marching on, and brave men and women still sold the age of reason in spite of jail and obliquity and ruin. And today the clergy collectively count only some 12 million followers amongst the 40 million people of Britain. England, France, and America ought to blush to hear the name of Thomas Paine. It recalls monumental ingratitude. Let the new age enjoying a freedom won by its fathers, knowing a larger truth and claiming a larger liberty, because of the work of those brave pioneers repairing the wrong. A small Thomas Paine Association, ably presided over by my artistic friend, Mr. Vander Wide of New York, has sought to redeem the honor of America by raising a memorial. Make it worthy of the richest and most powerful nation that was ever yet on this planet. And that is the end of Thomas Paine's Revolt Against the Bible, book number 1205 of the Little Blue Book series. And thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next book.